Hey, welcome to our second video on fluid balance for chapter 24. In the previous video, we talked about fluid balance, where fluid goes in the body, as well as fluid intake and thirst. And now we're going to be talking about the regulation of fluid output, as well as some more topics. So the only way to actually control water output significantly is through variation in urine volume. So remember we talked about these gains and losses, and if you remember from that diagram, the only real significant output is with urine, whereas breathing, water loss from expiration, as well as sweating, really isn't too significant. So the kidneys can't replace water or electrolytes, but they can slow the rate of water and electrolyte loss until the water and electrolytes can be later ingested. So if there's too much water or too much electrolytes, then the kidney is going to excrete those, and those will be excreted as urine since the body can't handle all of that at once. So the kidneys are able to do to change the urine volume because of adjustments in sodium reabsorption. So when sodium is reabsorbed or excreted, the water will follow. So different mechanisms of water output that I do want you to know is with ADH, which again, remember that's antidiuretic hormone. You should know where this hormone comes from, where is it synthesized, where is it released, what does it do? So ADH secretion is triggered by hypothalamic osmoreceptors. We talked about this in the last lecture in response to dehydration. So ADH will cause aquaporins to be synthesized in response to ADH. And these aquaporins are proteins that occur within the renal collecting ducts that allow water to diffuse back into the renal medulla. Definitely make sure to look at the anatomy and see how these work, because they're really quite important. So with these aquaporins, this means that sodium is still excreted, and the urine osmolarity, which is the amount of stuff in it, will increase. So ADH mostly works with negative feedback. So if the osmolarity of blood, if osmolarity rises or the blood volume decreases, then more ADH is going to be secreted, and it'll slow that. So if osmolarity falls and blood volume then rises, then ADH release is going to be inhibited, the tubules will reabsorb less water, urine output will increase, and the trends will be reversed. So again, here's the action of ADH. You need to know what ADH does, what stops its release, what stimulates ADH release, what are aquaporins, things like that. So if the body's in a state of fluid imbalance, then there will be an abnormality in total volume, concentration, or the distribution of fluid among the compartments. So we'll talk about the disorders of fluid balance. So the first is fluid deficiency, where fluid output exceeds intake over a long period of time. So this would be if you're getting rid of too much fluid, so if you're urinating too much, then you can't intake enough. So this can cause things like circulatory shock, neurological dysfunction because of the dehydration of brain cells, as well as it can be also can be caused by diarrhea, which is one of the highest, which causes the most infant mortality throughout the world. So there's two different types of deficiency, and these are volume depletion and dehydration. So hypovolemia, which is volume depletion, occurs when proportionate amounts of water and sodium are lost without any replacement. So the total water within the body will decline, but the osmolarity, or the amount of stuff within the fluid, remains normal. And this could be because of hemorrhage, burns, chronic vomiting, diarrhea, or an endocrine condition called Addison's disease. So dehydration, which is a negative fluid balance, occurs when the body eliminates significantly more water than it does sodium, so the extracellular fluid osmolarity will rise. And this can be caused by not drinking enough water, diabetes, which we'll talk about the actual term, what diabetes means, ADH hyposecretion, which is diabetes insipidus, too much sweating, or the overuse of diuretics. So infants are a little bit more vulnerable to dehydration than adults would be because of their really high metabolic rate. That means that they have to output more urine. So their kidneys can't concentrate urine effectively, so there's a greater ratio of body surface to volume, meaning there's more evaporation in their body. So dehydration will affect all fluid compartments, which would be the intracellular fluid, blood, and tissue fluid. So one example of dehydration can come from excessive sweating, where you have water loss from sweating. This sweat's going to be produced by the capillary filtration. And this would cause blood volume and blood pressure to drop, and the osmolarity of blood will rise. The blood will absorb tissue fluid to replace that blood loss. So that means that tissue fluid is going to be pulled from intracellular fluid. So this means that blood, intracellular fluid, and the tissue fluid all lose water. So definitely make sure you understand why this is. And this would be because, of course, because of osmotic gradients. So fluid balance is also impacted by the weather. So in the cold, skin blood vessels are constricted, and this will raise blood pressure, which will then inhibit ADH secretion. And so it'll increase the secretion of natriuretic peptides. We'll talk about natriuretic peptides, I think later in this lecture or in the urinary lecture, but definitely come back to this so you make sure that you understand how cold changes ADH secretion and natriuretic peptides. But the end effect of this is that urine output is increased and blood volume will be reduced. This is also because cold air is drier and will increase respiratory water loss, which also reduces blood volume. So cold weather, respiratory, and the urinary losses can actually cause a state of reduced blood volume, which is called hypovolemia. So it's kind of cool to know that cold can actually cause hypovolemia. So if we have too much fluid, of course, that's called fluid excess. And this is less common than fluid deficiency because the kidneys are pretty good at doing their job just by excreting more urine. But fluid excess can result from renal failure. So there's two types of fluid excess, and this would be volume excess, where both sodium and water are retained. The extracellular fluid remains isotonic. If you remember, isotonic means that it's at the same concentration. And a volume excess could be caused by aldosterone hypersecretion or by renal failure. You can also have hypotonic hydration, which is called water intoxication or having positive fluid balance. And I think we've probably all seen this maybe in the news where we've seen, I remember one news article where there was some sort of water drinking contest for some radio show and somebody actually died because of water intoxication. This is a real thing, but it's pretty rare. And this occurs when more water than sodium is ingested or retained within the body. So this causes the extracellular fluid to be hypotonic, which can cause cellular swelling. And the most severe effects of this would be pulmonary and cerebral edema, and then that would lead to death. So fluid sequestration is when excess fluid accumulates in a particular location. So think of this as edema. So this isn't within the entire body. So your total body water might be normal, but you might even have a circulating blood volume drop that might cause circulatory shock, or you'll have edema where you have swelling within tissues. Another cause of fluid sequestration is hemorrhage. So that would be where blood pools in tissues and that would be lost from the circulation.